these, if you'll pardon the expression, kind of these come to Jesus, moments where people were realizing, wait, this isn't what I thought seminary was going to be.
Yeah, seminary, people outside of seminary really have no idea of what happens within the walls of a seminary because, in most seminaries, by which I mean non-evangelical, non-fundamentalist seminaries, it's serious scholarship, and the people who are teaching classes on the Bible are trained in what German and other European and American scholars have been saying, and it just isn't what people expect.
It wasn't when I took classes with Walter Brueggemann, if you know him. So
yes, indeed.
Yeah, and he was very entertaining, and he would use words that I was pretty sure weren't in the Bible, period.
Yes, that's exactly right.
But anyway, so I so much loved the book for what we're going to get into here, which is really talking about these things in this very sober way about these contradictions that are in the Bible. But one other thought before we get there, I think both the book and most seminaries and the way that they use the sort of the historical, critical, the textual perspective, that's the reason why some church traditions just can't go there. They would actually make it seem like it's a negative that you've gone to seminary, almost like you've gone to go get ruined, as opposed to if you had just stayed in your room and read the book, that's all you would need to do.
That's right. When I went off to Princeton Theological Seminary, I was warned by my friends that there weren't any Christians there, and that it was a dangerous place. And it was just for this reason, because they knew that the biblical scholars and the theologians didn't think that the Bible was some kind of infallible guide to faith and practice, and so this would ruin my faith. And it even seemed strange to me at the time when I was an evangelical Christian to think that you shouldn't explore what people are saying and that you should ignore scholarship rather than try to deal with it. And so I thought, I really need to deal with this, and as it turned out, I got converted.
Yeah. In effect, though, and I'm glad you framed it that way, in effect, aren't they right? Don't they get to say, I told you so? You went to seminary and it ruined you.
I don't think it ruined me. I think I saw the light.
Okay, but you're an agnostic now, and that would be just the reason that they would say, whatever you do, don't go to seminary and be around all these non-Christians. In that way, you end up going to seminary and end up as a non-Christian.
Yeah, well, that's true, but it wasn't because of seminary. And, I don't talk about this so much in Jesus Interrupted, but in another book that I have, God's Problem, I talk about how I became an agnostic. And it really wasn't because of the historical scholarship on the Bible. It was because I got to a point where I could no longer deal with why there's so much pain and suffering in the world if there's supposed to be a good and powerful God who's in charge of it. I eventually left the faith for that reason. But the historical scholarship certainly changed me from being an evangelical to being a more liberal Christian. It was only after that I left the faith.
And all that's left at this point is total atheism.
Well, I'm not an atheist. I'm actually an agnostic.
Right, that's what I mean. So what will stop you? I'm saying if you're looking at the progression here. Yeah, right? I mean, you're going from conservative Christian, evangelical to liberal Christian, agnostic. It's really after that? It's pretty much atheist and then Satanist, or how do you work that in?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I get a lot of emails from people who tell me things like, well, you're completely right. The New Testament is filled with problems. Now, what you need to do is read the Quran,
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's really interesting because there are adherents of almost every tradition believe the same thing about their holy scriptures. I mean, there are plenty of Muslims who say that the Quran was essentially dictated to Muhammad, and that's why it is inerrant. And the same thing some people would say who are conservative Jews who would say that, the first 5 books of the Bible were dictated to Moses. And right? I mean, isn't there something in every tradition, some people who would believe that?
Well, these traditions that have scriptures as their focus certainly have this element. And, it's funny, the two groups who contact me the most to try and get me to look seriously at their faith perspective are Muslims and Mormons, both of whom really like my work on the New Testament and who think that they've got the answers because they have scriptures that, in fact, don't have these problems.
Have you ever taken the same critical eye that you bring to the Bible, specifically the New Testament, and taken that to looking at the Book of Mormon?
Actually, when I was an evangelical, I read through the Book of Mormon to find its contradictions and its historical mistakes and that sort of thing. And I page marked all the books, all the pages, and then when Mormon missionaries would come by, I'd sit down and talk with them for a couple hours. So I knew about the problems of the Book of Mormon even before I saw the problems in the New Testament.
Well, in a way, aren't you kind of morally obligated to write a book exposing everybody's contradictions in all of their holy scriptures? I mean, why don't you go ahead equally and pee in everybody else's pools too at the same time?
Yeah, well, if I were qualified to do it, I probably would. So I may be morally obligated, but I'm not intellectually equipped.
Well, I'm just kidding. But I think, and I haven't spent any time with the Book of Mormon other than sort of passing references here and there, and I don't know a lot about the inconsistencies within the Quran, except to know that I've been told by people who are Muslim that they're there, and that they struggle with them in the same way that a lot of Christians struggle with the inconsistencies, for example, in the New Testament text, or for that matter, the Bible in general. But, shouldn't we be surprised? I mean, should we ever be surprised by that? In that the Bible is constructed over a very long period of time. It's like building a house and having about 1,000 separate contractors come through at various times.
Yeah, people don't realize this. I mean, it's certainly, especially true with the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, of course, is that these authors are living they're living centuries apart. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years, people writing their perspectives. And so, of course, they're going to be different. And with the New Testament, you have well over a dozen authors living in different countries in different decades who've heard different things and have different perspectives. And the reason people don't see this is because the Bible's all within one set of covers, and it all seems like one book. But in fact, it's not one book. The Protestant Bible is 66 books, and these books have different authors and they have different perspectives.
Well, and then the Catholic Bible too has a different list of what is considered canonical. So even when we talk about the Bible, we're talking about a small subset of Bibles.
Well, and one of the things I deal with in Jesus Interrupted is the question of how we got this Bible. I mean, what in the New Testament? Why these 27 books? Why not some other Gospels and some other apocalypses and epistles and things? And that's one of the really hard historical questions that historians have dealt with, is how we got this collection. But the important thing for people to know is that it's a collection of books that were made much later. That it was hundreds of years before anybody decided that it would be these books and only these books.
Although it's generally accepted that the first gospel, the Gospel of Mark, was written some 35 years or something like that after the crucifixion of Jesus?
Yeah, usually thought to be written around 65 or 70 AD,
right.
So 35 or 40 years later. The Gospel of John was probably the last gospel written maybe around 90 or 95 CE, so 60 or 65 years after Jesus. So they're 40 to 60 years after Jesus' death. And they're separated from each other by 20 or 30 years.
When we come back, I want you to address the sort of the classic apology for the inconsistencies that you have. It's like 4 different witnesses on 4 different street corners to the same accident. Okay, we can address that when we come back, and then also. I want to talk about some of the Gnostic texts. I know you've written extensively about that, and they get some passing references in Jesus Interrupted, but I want to talk about the material that was not included in the New Testament, as that has come under so much scrutiny and continues to because of the popularity of books and movies like The Da Vinci Code and now Angels and Demons coming up. And we'll get to all of that, including lots of calls tonight for Bart Ehrman, the author of Jesus Interrupted, the best-selling Misquoting Jesus, and we'll talk about the hidden contradictions in the Bible. We'll reveal a few of them during the course of the evening. We won't probably get to all of them, but we'll save some of those for your questions coming up later on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnet.